Welcome to our first lesson in adaptive program planning. Today we're going to explore something that might challenge how you've thought about planning your entire career. We're going to talk about the evolution of planning, from traditional linear approaches to more adaptive, agile methods. This isn't just an academic exercise. Understanding this shift is fundamental to becoming an effective public health practitioner in today's complex world. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to do three things. First, you'll compare and contrast waterfall and agile planning methodologies. These represent two fundamentally different ways of thinking about how work gets done. Second, you'll explain the principles of Public Health 3.0. This framework represents where our field is heading. And third, you'll recognize the characteristics of complex adaptive systems. This is crucial because health exists within these systems, not in isolation. Let's start with what most of us learned in school, the waterfall approach. Picture a waterfall cascading down rocks. Each phase flows into the next. You assess, then you plan, then you implement, then you evaluate. It's neat, it's orderly, and it assumes that the world is predictable, that if you put in input A, you'll reliably get output B. Now this approach has its place. It works beautifully for stable, well-defined problems. Building a bridge, for example, the physics don't change. But here's the question. Is public health like building a bridge? The honest answer is no. Public health crises are inherently non-linear. Think about what happened during the pandemic. Organizations with rigid 5-year strategic plans suddenly found those plans irrelevant. The problem changed faster than the planning cycle could accommodate. Communities' needs shifted, new challenges emerged, and those beautiful, carefully crafted plans, they sat on shelves while practitioners scrambled to adapt in real time. This isn't a failure of the people, it's a failure of the methodology when applied to complex dynamic situations. Enter Agile. This approach originated in software development where engineers realized that user needs changed faster than they could write code. So they developed a different philosophy. Instead of resisting change, embrace it. Instead of long planning cycles, use short iterations called sprints. Instead of waiting until the end to evaluate, build in continuous feedback loops. And here's the mindset shift that matters most. A plan is a hypothesis, not a script. Let that sink in for a moment. Your plan is your best guess about what will work. You test it, you learn, you adapt. This evolution in planning methodology aligns perfectly with what's being called Public Health 3.0. Let me give you the quick history. Public Health 1.0 was about sanitation, clean water, sewage systems, controlling infectious disease. That was the late 1800s and early 1900s. Public Health 2.0 emerged mid-century, focusing on chronic disease prevention, health education, behavior change. Now we're in Public Health 3.0. This framework positions health departments not as service providers, but as chief health strategists for their communities, convening partners, using real-time data, working across sectors. You can't do Public Health 3.0 with waterfall thinking. A core principle of Public Health 3.0 is cross-sector collaboration. Here's why this matters. Health outcomes aren't just shaped by healthcare or health departments. They're shaped by housing, by education, by transportation, by employment. No single agency can address all these determinants. So what do? We build shared agendas across traditional silos. We convene partners who might never have worked together before. Housing authorities and health departments, schools and hospitals, transportation planners and community health workers. This requires a fundamentally different kind of planning, one that's flexible enough to accommodate multiple stakeholders with different timelines and priorities. To understand why Agile works better for public health, we need to understand complex adaptive systems. These systems have multiple interconnected agents, individuals, organizations, policies, all acting somewhat independently. From these interactions, emergent behaviors arise, behaviors that you couldn't predict just by looking at the individual parts. The relationships are non-linear. Sometimes a small intervention has a huge effect. Sometimes a massive investment produces nothing. And here's what's fascinating. These systems self-organize and adapt over time. They're not static. They're constantly evolving. Communities are complex adaptive systems. So are health systems. So are the problems we're trying to solve. So, what does this mean for how we plan? First, accept that you cannot perfectly predict outcomes in complex systems. This isn't a failure of your analysis, it's the nature of the system. Second, design for learning, not just execution. Your program should be generating information continuously, not just at the end evaluation. Third, build feedback mechanisms into every phase. How will you know if something isn't working? How quickly can you adjust? And fourth, embrace uncertainty as a feature, not a bug. The uncertainty is telling you something important about the nature of the problem you're addressing. Let me summarize the key differences. In Waterfall, phases are sequential, one after another. In Agile, you work in iterative cycles, returning to earlier phases as you learn. In Waterfall, change is costly. It means going back and redoing work. In Agile, change is expected. It's built into the process. Waterfall emphasizes heavy upfront planning, trying to anticipate everything before you start. Agile treats planning as continuous. You plan a little, do a little, learn a little, repeat. And evaluation? In Waterfall, it comes at the end. In Agile, feedback flows throughout the entire process. Let's wrap up with the key takeaways from today's lesson. Traditional waterfall planning assumes a level of predictability that rarely exists in public health contexts. Agile approaches embrace change and build in continuous learning, treating plans as hypotheses rather than scripts. Public Health 3.0 demands cross-sector collaboration and adaptive thinking, positioning us as strategists and conveners. And when we're working within complex adaptive systems, we need humble, iterative approaches that acknowledge the limits of our ability to predict and control. In our next lesson, we'll ground ourselves in the proceed framework, structure that prevents chaos while still allowing for adaptation. Thank you for your attention.